These are the 10 best JRPGs of all time. If you haven't played some of these yet, take note. Hey, it's Just the Gems, I'm Brandon, and it's time to break it down. I talk about a lot of JRPGs on this channel, and I try to present a fair critique of the games I'm looking at. But the time for nuance is over, and the time for sweeping statements of grandeur has arrived. These JRPGs are the 10 best JRPGs ever in existence in this or any parallel universe. And to be clear, I'm not even necessarily saying these are my 10 favorite JRPGs, though some of them definitely are. They're just the ones that, in my opinion, deserve to be considered the best. I'll try and explain why I think that's the case. If you think I'm wrong, don't just sit there and seethe. Let me know what your top 10 is down in the comments. All right, let's get into it. Persona 4 belongs on this list because it finished the job its predecessors started of upending the typical JRPG format to give us essentially a new subgenre, the life simulator JRPG. Yeah, Persona 3 started things moving in that direction, but Persona 4 carried it across the finish line with arguably a better storyline and much more engaging gameplay. Persona 4 takes the dark, twisted format of its predecessor and hyper-focuses on a small town and a murder mystery. People are dying in ways that seem impossible, frankly supernatural. And of course, that ends up being the case, because it would be pretty boring if it was just some guy with a ladder bumping these people off and leaving them on top of utility lines. The focus of the plot makes it feel more personal, and the kids who get caught up in it face real personal stakes. The combat uses a brilliant weakness-based system where the goal in each fight is to strike enemies with just the right attacks to knock them down so you can wail on them with your entire group. It's deeply weird, super unsettling, frequently hilarious, and all in all, a masterpiece. The Persona 4 Golden re-release on the PlayStation Vita, and now on basically every platform, really cemented Atlus as the reigning champion of modern-day set JRPG storytelling and compelling turn-based gameplay. With Persona 4 Revival coming early next year, more people than ever are going to get to see the strengths of this game really shine. Certain people would call for my immediate expulsion from YouTube, if not potentially my incarceration, if I didn't have at least one handheld JRPG on this list. Fortunately, it's easy for me to talk about the greatness of Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology. This is truly a once-in-a-lifetime sort of game, which I guess is funny because technically we got it twice. Once on the Nintendo DS, and once more on the 3DS in this enhanced version with a bunch of additions. New storylines, voice work throughout, new character artwork. It's a really strong upgrade. Radiant Historia is the story of Stock, a knight who gets sent on a mission for his government and ends up in possession of a book that lets him travel through time. Time travel's handled pretty differently here than in most other time travel games. Instead of going to the past to change things in the future, you essentially find yourself traveling along two different parallel timelines simultaneously. You're able to use information gleaned in one timeline to affect change in the other, and all the while you're trying to solve the mystery of what's destroying the world and what's up with this crazy book. The combat is wholly unique in the JRPG space, so it's not just an incredible story. From the get-go, you can completely manipulate the turn order of your characters. You can set them all to perform their tasks sequentially, which is key, because when you attack your enemies is just as important as how. Enemies are positioned on a grid, and you can use different attacks to move enemies to different positions on that grid. If you manage to maneuver multiple enemies onto the same space, your attacks do more damage, which makes for some of the most fun JRPG strategizing I've ever seen. It's straight up criminal that this game is stuck on the 3DS. Atlus already gave us a console remaster of The Alliance Alive, another 3DS JRPG from around the same era. We need this one too, guys. Final Fantasy X rises to the level of best ever because it transformed modern console JRPGs. You could argue that a similar transformation happened in the 32-bit generation, but really all 32-bit did was swap out sprites for polygons. Our interactions with the world of the game were still the same as in the 8 and 16-bit games, and sure, we had some cool 3D happening in battles, but just as before, there was a strong disconnect between the fighting and the exploration, at least in terms of presentation. Final Fantasy X finally broke down that wall and gave us a fully 3D world that felt real and lived in. It was an exotic place for most of us in the West who played it. After all, it was the first Final Fantasy to abandon the typical Western fantasy setting and give us something Asian inspired. And it brought voice acting to Final Fantasy. That's huge. It wasn't the first JRPG to have voice acting, of course, but you can tell they really put in the effort to integrate the voice work with the character animation to create a truly cinematic experience. Of course, just being cinematic isn't enough to make a game worthy of being on this list. It has to have a story and gameplay to give that presentation weight. The story of Final Fantasy X is basically an isekai, a story of a regular person yanked unceremoniously out of their own world and dropped in another. Tidus is a professional athlete who finds himself thrust dramatically 1,000 years into the future, into a world he barely recognizes, and he has to help a summoner named Yuna put a stop to a godlike force known as Sin. Sometimes Square Enix is subtle in their religious imagery, and sometimes the villain is called Sin. What follows is a beautiful and heartbreaking trip across the length of this entire world as Tidus learns more and more about what's going on and the consequences of their journey. It's some of the best storytelling this series has ever done. The gameplay steps away from the active time battles of the previous 6 entries in favor of straight-up turn-based combat. It's a more modern rendition than the first 3 Final Fantasies, though. You can see the turn order on screen at all times, and you can quickly and easily swap characters on standby into the fray whenever you want. On just about every measurable level, Final Fantasy raised the stakes for the entire series and the entire genre. And even if you missed it way back when, it's still worth seeking out. I know some people are going to cry foul about having more modern games on this list. After all, I'm sure they'll argue, how can we say yet if these sorts of games are going to stand the test of time? While I kind of understand the point they're making in my head, I have to push back on it because I see video games as an art form that's constantly moving forward. It seems silly to me to ignore the great achievements we see in new games just because they're new. We don't have to act like a video game is like a fine wine, that we have to let it chill in the basement for 20 years before we can truly appreciate how good it is. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is the 1996 Ferrando Erbaluce di Calusso of video games. That's apparently a really good wine. I don't know anything about wines. I just Googled what's a really good wine. Anyway, Expedition 33 is the story of a dying world in the grips of some gigantic goddess known as the Paintress. Every year she paints a number on a monolith, and everyone who's that age dies. It's a dreary setup, but Expedition 33 manages to balance just about every conceivable emotion as it tells its story, gut-punching you one minute and cracking you up the next. It's one of the most gorgeous games ever made, too. The world design is just next level. It's got some of the trippiest settings I've seen in any form of media, and everything just has a level of polish that is rarely seen in JRPGs. The combat system is turn-based, but it implements a real-time dodge and parry mechanic that keeps every fight extremely engaging. The stakes feel high for every battle, and the satisfaction of successfully pulling off a multi-part dodge or parry is pretty much unmatched. The characters feel like family, both to each other and to the player, and their interactions are among the most heartfelt, the most hilarious, the most exciting I've seen in a video game in years. Expedition 33 is something pretty special in the world of JRPGs. It's a new vision into what this genre could be, and it's caught the attention of all the big players in the space. Don't be surprised if you start to see its influence popping up in other games in the next few years. Final Fantasy VI blew the lid off JRPG storytelling in the 16-bit era. Gone were the simple plots with cookie-cutter characters, replaced now with complex stories about war, filled with nuanced characters who weren't just good or evil. Well, with the exception of what is possibly Final Fantasy's greatest villain of all time, Kefka. He's a clown who has no problem poisoning an entire kingdom to get what he wants. We'd seen diabolical villains in Final Fantasy games before, but Kefka brought everything to an entirely new level. The characters in this game really stole the show. No other Final Fantasy game has had characters like these. Heck, no other Final Fantasy game has had as many characters either. You can recruit up to 14 playable characters, and in a first for the series, some of them were even missable. It really drove home the idea that your choices had consequences, not just on how your game progressed, but on the lives of the people in this world. 6 pulled away from the job system of 5 and gave each character their own unique skill. Some of these skills might allow you to label a character with a particular class if you wanted to. Locke's special skill is steal, so if you want to call him a thief, that's fine by me. It's not fine by him though. He considers himself a treasure hunter. But point being, class was really de-emphasized in favor of more customizability in your party. As you make your way through the story, you'll find espers, which are creatures that both function as summon monsters and also teach you a variety of magic spells when you have them equipped. That means every single party member can learn whatever magic you want them to, provided you're willing to invest the time in teaching it to them. Combining magic with the character's inherent skills, along with the robust relic system that allows you to equip gear that gives characters special abilities, means you can craft a party that's well suited for any situation. Many people consider this to be the pinnacle of Final Fantasy, and I'm definitely sympathetic with that idea. It's a game that holds up surprisingly well despite its age, and fortunately, with the Pixel remasters, it's widely available if you want to check it out. Undertale is definitely the odd one out in this list. Developed almost entirely by a single person, this is a game that wears its influences on its sleeve, not to mention its heart. Toby Fox set out to create a role-playing game that would resonate with people the way so many of the genre classics had resonated with him, and somehow he managed to do all that and a whole lot more. Undertale is the story of a child who falls into the monster world and who wants to go home. It's an incredibly simple premise, but as the story progresses, despite the goal never changing, you begin to see the many, many layers of complexity in the world of this game. You meet a cast of characters that are equal parts charming and hilarious and heartbreaking, and each one of them has a major part to play. Despite looking like a cutesy Earthbound-alike, it's actually a story about grief and loss and carrying on. And it's about choosing to break cycles of violence once and for all. That's really the key differentiator in Undertale, the combat system. In Undertale, while you can certainly play it like any other JRPG, attacking and using items to beat all the monsters that try and stand in your way, the only way to achieve the true ending is to avoid killing a single thing. Yeah, Undertale allows you to spare every enemy you encounter. You do this by solving simple puzzles during combat, determining what action will placate the enemy so you can choose to spare it and leave the battle with no bloodshed. Sparing an enemy will get you money, but it won't net you any experience points. That means the further you get in the game, the more difficult it becomes, and the more challenging it is to even stay alive. Fortunately, you don't just have to sit there and take every hit that comes your way. When enemies attack, you enter into a sort of bullet hell minigame where you move your heart icon around the playing field to dodge enemy attacks. It can take a little practice, but with enough effort, you can get good enough to dodge anything. Playing as a pacifist is a real challenge, but it's worthwhile in order to fully experience the message of this game. We're lucky Undertale exists, and if it's somehow escaped you until now, I really recommend you seek it out. Xenogears was the first JRPG I played on the PlayStation 1. When I tell you that no other JRPG hit me as hard as Xenogears did, keep in mind that I had played almost every single JRPG that had been available at that time. Xenogears still managed to shake me to my core, and it did so by telling what was at that time, and arguably remains to this day, the most complex, bizarre, and compelling story ever told in a video game. Ostensibly, it's about Faye, a martial artist amnesiac who comes into possession of a giant robot and gets caught up in a massive war that's been ravaging the world for decades. But on a deeper level, it's about humanity and faith and personal choice. No one is as good as they appear to be on the surface, and no one is as basely evil as they might seem either. Xenogears was one of the early pioneers of using 2D sprites on 3D backgrounds, a style that allowed them to avoid the block arm problem of contemporaries like Final Fantasy VII, and if I'm honest, it's a style that holds up so much better today. It was a game that also offered two complete battle systems, one for on-foot fights and one for battles inside your giant mechs, which are called gears, by the way. On foot, you press different combinations of buttons to string together various attacks, creating combos that do devastating damage. Gear battles involve resource management in the form of fuel. Different attacks use different amounts of fuel, and being sure you're fueled up and able to fight is tougher than it seems at first glance, especially in some of the later boss battles. Xenogears was one part of what creator Tetsuya Takahashi had intended to be a massive science fiction epic, and although his original plan has been more or less abandoned, it still lives on through his subsequent series, Xenosaga and Xenoblade. It's a staggering work of genius, and despite some of the rough edges, including a second disc that feels incomplete in some ways, it's a masterpiece that deserves all the love it's gotten over the years, and probably more. Spoiler for the rest of this list, but you won't find the original Final Fantasy VII here at all. Not that I don't think Final Fantasy VII was a seminal work of video game fiction, or that it brought in an entirely new player base for the series. It definitely was and did those things. But what makes Final Fantasy VII Rebirth special, honestly both Remake and Rebirth, is that they're the culmination of decades of thought and character development and writing. Playing through Rebirth, you'll see a world that feels so real. Every aspect of it, even things that might seem at first glance trivial, are thought through and have a reason for being. They're fully realized in a way the original game never came close to. This is due entirely to the team having such a long time to reflect on the work. The writer, Kazushige Nojima, has never left the world of Final Fantasy VII alone. He wrote movies, novels, short stories about the world of Final Fantasy VII. He introduced new characters and new plots. They created entirely new games, from prequels like Crisis Core to sequels like Dirge of Cerberus. This world has been percolating for so long, and with the remake project, Square Enix are finally able to combine all of that effort into one giant project. I love what's come of this so far. In a way, it actually makes me kind of sad, because I know we're never going to have a Final Fantasy world that's as fully realized as this one again. How could we if it took decades in the oven for the dough to rise? You know what I mean? Beyond giving us what is, in my opinion, one of the most intricate and interesting worlds in video game fiction, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth gives us a battle system that blows away every other Final Fantasy system. It's raw action on one hand, but on the other, strategically slowing down time to engage with the menus feels like the best combination of old and new. Even more so than Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth gets you engaged with the action more fully by encouraging you to switch characters often so that you can power up special tag team attacks. And these are flashy and over the top and just awesome. Like I said, I don't think we're ever going to get a Final Fantasy that comes close to this level of love and care again. That's why I don't care if they continue making games in this world. It's a world I'm more than happy to revisit for the rest of my life. I know this shows up in the #1 slot on a lot of people's lists, and I respect that. I think for a long time it would have shown up at #1 on mine too. But second place on a list like this is still among the highest honors you could give a game, and few games are as deserving of that sort of honor as Chrono Trigger. It feels a little silly to even be talking about this game because it seems like everyone in the JRPG community knows all about it. But I'm sure there are some of you out there who aren't as familiar, so I'll say this about it. Chrono Trigger is one of the most beautiful, fun, perfectly paced experiences you can have in any video game. It's a story about time travel that manages to avoid being confusing as hell, and it's a story about saving the world that somehow feels unique and distinct from every other Save the World plot that came before or after it. It's got incredibly unique characters with an array of combat abilities, and the way its combat plays out was and still is revolutionary. Let's start there. Battles take place right where you are, nothing random about them. This means that unlike pretty much every other JRPG in existence, every single battle in Chrono Trigger is a custom, curated experience. The developers had to plan them out and set them up and execute them, and they managed to do it perfectly. Chrono Trigger's implementation of the Final Fantasy active time battle system is arguably the best of any game, and it manages to provide a challenge while making it completely unnecessary to grind. It has one of the most gorgeous soundtracks of all time, a work of certifiable genius. From top to bottom, it's almost immaculate. A lot of this might just sound like nostalgia talking, which fair. I am nostalgic for this game. It's responsible for taking a genre I loved and turning it into a hugely significant part of my life. I wouldn't be the JRPG player I am today if I hadn't played Chrono Trigger. It's the high watermark everyone is constantly trying to reach for. It really deserves more attention, and I'm gonna just say this here. I think this year, 2026, is the year we'll finally get something new from Chrono Trigger. A remake, a remaster, something to resurrect this franchise and give us more of this brilliance. This isn't a mistake. I didn't edit things out of order in this video. Trails in the Sky First Chapter is the best JRPG of all time. At least for now. Here's the thing. If it weren't for this game, then Trails in the Sky FC, the original game for the PSP released ages ago, would have been on this list. It wouldn't have been in first place, but it would have been here somewhere. The reason it's not is only because Trails in the Sky First Chapter, the remake, has supplanted it in every reasonable way. It presents to us the perfect, ideal form of a remake. It retains all the good from the original, the story, the characters, the world building, the music, and it brings them all into the modern era with absolutely gorgeous graphics and refined gameplay that might just be the best in the entire genre. I'm not exaggerating, I'm not kidding. Trails in the Sky First Chapter is the best. If you've seen my channel before, you likely already know all about Trails, since I know I won't shut up about it. But for everyone else, Trails in the Sky is the story of Estelle as she sets out to become a bracer, essentially a bounty hunter with a rock-solid moral code. As she makes her way through the country of Liberl, she meets a whole cast of characters and gets involved in their lives, helps them solve their problems, and then moves on. It's a beautiful coming-of-age story in its own right. But what makes it even more brilliant is that it's really just a prologue. The entire game is laying the foundation not just for its own sequel, but for the entire series. The Trails series grew out of the seed that this game planted, and we're still reaping the fruit from it to this day. The remake is the perfect opportunity for anyone who's been intimidated by the sheer size of the series to come on board with the rest of us. Trails is the best JRPG series of all time, and this entry is practically perfect in every way. The only game I think might be able to dethrone it in the near future is, well, Trails in the Sky Second Chapter, which comes out this September. This game is a monumental achievement, and if you haven't played it yet, you're in for an incredible time. That's my list. Tell me what you think down in the comments, and be sure to check out my podcast, the JRPG Pursuit. Link for that is in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.